back to the Cluey Podcast, where we help conscious consumers like you get clueyed into the latest conscious tips, topics, and brands from impact-driven founders to experts and thought leaders on the topic at hand. I'm your host, Maryclaire, founder of Cluey. Let's get clueyed in. Today's topic, the impact your furniture has on people and the planet. To discuss this, our guest today is Whitney Falk, the founder and CEO of Driggs, the only B Corp certified furniture rental company, and they also provide rent-to-own and traditional furniture for ownership options as well. Whitney, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. Thank you. Great intro. An awesome podcast.
Thanks. Well, I want to hear a little bit more. We didn't get too deep into the intro because I want to hear a little bit more from you about your background and what inspired you to start Driggs.
Yeah, for sure. So the best way to describe kind of the genesis and the history of ZZ, it was a little bit of like a twofold bifurcated path, if you will. So I studied art history in college. I've always loved design. I've always been a bit furniture obsessed. I'm a little bit of like a high-end hoarder, if you will. So thankfully I figured out how to make a business out of it. But going deeper, when I graduated with an art history degree, I moved to New York. I had student loans. I really couldn't afford working at a gallery, working at like Christie's or one of the auction houses. So I threw my hat into the ring of finance and worked my way up. I actually started as an administrative assistant at a hedge fund, and then I went to running IR at that hedge fund, and then transitioned over to what they call the sell side. So I went to an investment bank and eventually worked my way up into equity research sales. So that's a fancy term for being a stockbroker. And my carve out, the companies that I largely really focused on were in specialty retail. And so that really translated to furniture manufacturers, furniture retailers, other consumer brands. And so I got to know the inner workings of these major behemoth companies. And, that's one of the paths, if you will. And then the other path was I still love design. It's like my passion and my lifeblood. And so on nights and weekends, I was helping friends and then eventually friends of friends create space. And so in the evenings, I was working with furniture where it struck me that when made well, furniture is the most circular product out there. It's why antiques exist. It's why vintage furniture exists. I was installing these pieces that were made well before me and would outlive me for many, many years or even centuries. And then in my day-to-day at Jefferies at the bank, I was covering these major furniture manufacturers that were intentionally building a planned obsolescence into the goods that they produced. So furniture that was only meant to last for one apartment or one office environment, really 1 or 2 times worth of use. The average lifespan of most mass-produced furniture is 3 to 5 years. And so it was just this crazy cognitive dissonance of like, whoa, we have gotten so far off from how our parents and our grandparents used to purchase furniture, lifetime warranties, guarantees. That would be the status quo when you were making a big investment in furniture. And we'd moved so far away from that for different reasons as it related to consumer consumption. And so, something needed to change because it was both, a huge hit to consumer pocketbooks over time when you'd have to walk back through those stores and repeat that purchase. And then also it was extremely degrading to the environment. This is a vicious cycle of production and consumption. And when you look at that, furniture is the least recycled household trash because of all the glues and resins that go into its production. It just seemed like something needed to change. So we started ZZ. Yeah.
That's such an inspiring story. And that's so cool that you were able to kind of connect those dots between, seeing and helping, with design and installing pieces and recognizing how long furniture should last and comparing that to your day job experience of like seeing companies purposefully make it not last.
Exactly. And yeah, it was just wild to me because like that kind of like average lifespan of 3 to 5 years was in an effort to calculate LTV, which stands for lifetime value. So how often a consumer would be walking back through their store's doors and making that purchase. And so it was just so obvious that something needed to change because furniture, again, when made well, is truly the most circular product out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so tell us a bit about ZZ's model and why it's different. I briefly talked about ZZ, but give us a quick the quick and dirty on what it is that makes ZZ unique relative to the standard furniture companies out there today.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, our model is completely predicated on the goods lasting for as long as possible, as furniture can and should when made well, and again, furniture can and should outlive us. That's why we have antiques and vintage. So with ZZ, we're really proud to say that we're the only platform in the world where you can rent or purchase on demand, exceptional, deeply sustainable furniture. And it's a rent to own model. So every dollar that you spend when you're renting counts toward the purchase price. Now, we have a nationwide presence in terms of what you can purchase on ZZ. And then we also do rentals nationwide as well. We're mainly focusing on rentals in the New York metro area and Eastern Seaboard, only because it doesn't make sense right now if you were saying if you're in Michigan, which is where I'm from, to just rent like one item from ZZ, just to ship it out to you and then to ship it back if you decide you don't want to keep it, doesn't make sense. But if you wanted like a whole room, a whole home, then it makes more sense. So we're really proud of that, and soon we'll have more of a nationwide presence. But we're also unique in that we offer both contemporary and vintage and antique pieces. So on the contemporary side, we've partnered with a little over a dozen emerging independent designers, and then also manufacturers here in North America, one in Asia, and then one in Europe as well. But mainly our presence is here in North America. It's cool to see that High Point, North Carolina, which has always been the upholstery capital, largely considered the upholstery capital of the world, is really having a renaissance, which is so cool because there was a bit of a brain drain, in the 60s up until the 90s with globalization. And then also, again, where I'm from, Michigan, Western Michigan is largely considered like the contract furniture capital of the United States, at least. And what that means is like a lot of really high quality office furniture, like formerly Herman Miller and Knoll, and now they've combined in Miller Knoll. And so we're excited to just be putting more of a focus on just this amazing design presence that's already existing here in the U.S., but making it more accessible and enjoyable to people like you and me. So furniture on demand, we keep inventory, and then also our manufacturers keep inventory for us too. And then also, every dollar that you spend renting counts toward that purchase price if you fall in love with something and want to keep it. And we're supporting an emerging design community that I think is so important, especially in the landscape of AI taking over, everything here or there. Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, that is so cool and just such a unique model. And also, I learned like about 10 different new facts in that of where the upholstery capital of the world is and the contract furniture capital of the world.
Yeah.
Just chock full of facts about the furniture industry, Whitney.
Hey, I can wax poetic for hours about furniture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love it. I love it. Very interesting. And, let's get into the meat of our interview here, which is ultimately, the impact that furniture has on people on the planet. You certainly touched on this at the beginning about how we've come so far from, previous generations and how they thought about purchasing furniture. But because of that, we almost have to kind of like relearn certain things. And I think when it comes to conscious consumption, it's easy for us to think about purchases we're making daily or weekly or monthly, like personal care products, household cleaning products, and clothes. But we forget about the impact of those more infrequent purchases. Even if, to your point, they've become more frequent than ever before, they're still relatively infrequent, like furniture, once every few years, maybe. So because of that, you started this company to help people think more mindfully about that purchase. Let's go through, like impacts on the planet, impacts on workers, impacts on the customer. Let's kind of just go through one by one and tell us about some things that you think consumers maybe have forgotten at this point about the impact that the modern day furniture industry has on all those different areas of life.
Yeah, certainly. It's furniture strikes me as like this very, very prevalent but little known huge player when it comes to our sustainable future and the goods that we consume. So namely, it's as I mentioned briefly before, it's our least recycled household trash. And unfortunately, that's because so much mainstream furniture, at least case goods, so not a ton of seating, But all of your case goods, your shelving, dining tables, coffee tables, nightstands, side tables, so on, have veneered surfaces. So it's like 1/16 of an inch of actual hard or soft wood. And then below that is MDF or particle board, different materiality that's comprised of pulverized wood that's glued together, or there's some resin involved to glue it together. And that's the culprit. That resin then alienates it from being recycled. And because it's a veneered surface, you can't restore it, right? Like it's just 1/16 of an inch. So unlike hardwood or softwood, you can't sand it and refinish it, as you can with wood. So, and this is furniture. It takes up some space. And so it's taking up so much space in our landfill. Our ZZ team, we were I don't want to say like happy to see it, but we were really relieved to see that for the first time ever in the fall, the New York Times described the term fast furniture. They'd never, from what we could tell and from our research, they'd never used the term before. And not only did they use the term, but it was right on the head, on the front page, above the fold online, like right next to something about our presidency. And so we were so just like, hey, wow, it's happening. Like we're starting to pay attention to this. And the article was on all of the fast furniture that Americans had bought during COVID when they were at home, and how in 3 to 5 years, it's just all going to go to the landfill. And so, I mean, it gives me chills, and it's quite, it's unfortunate to talk about, but at the same time, I actually think that fast furniture is going to correct its wrongs faster than fashion. And because it's so easy to understand that, oh wow, yeah, this isn't real wood. This is a veneered surface. There is glue and resin that's going into this. Yet furniture, it makes sense once we think about it. When made well, it should last longer than us. So I'm excited because there's a lot of new innovation when it comes to materiality. Not necessarily we should go back to using hardwoods and softwoods, because of course that's our lifeblood, and timber and lumber is so important to us. But there's some really ingenious materiality that's being constructed, and also bamboo as a new material, or different concoctions using pulverized wood, but in a way that doesn't have that resin, which then nixes it from being recycled. So that's it relating to wood. And when we look at Harvard Business School did a case study in 2013, and then they just did an update a few years back, and it focused on how IKEA wants to hit these big sustainability goals, yet at the same time they're still consuming over 1% of the world's timber consumption annually every year, over 1%. And this
just one company,
yeah, and it's still largely unregulated forests in Eastern Europe and Russia, and so. Wow. It's a big deal, and it's something that we have to be talking about, and they very much are paying attention, and they very much know that they have to start righting their wrongs. But it's going to be a fascinating topic to watch, and I think we're going to be talking about it a lot more in the years to come.
Definitely. Well, I mean, I'm so glad we started with impact on the planet, because you mentioned fast furniture. People, our listeners are certainly at this point pretty familiar with the concept of fast fashion. Last year, we similarly, I think around that New York Times article, wrote a blog about how Shein and all of these fast fashion companies were starting to enter into the home goods and homeware space, selling lamps and mirrors for as little as $2, which is just mind blowing. So it's crazy, but those were some really interesting facts that you shared with us about impact on the planet. I guess moving into impact on workers. So one thing you mentioned for your brand that's particularly unique is that you work with a lot of designers, up and coming emerging designers, as well as well-established designers, to offer some really unique pieces to your customers. When you go enter into the process of working with these folks, how do you make sure that the designers and the suppliers you're working with are manufacturing in a way that's consistent with the intended impact behind your brand as it relates to their workforce?
Yeah, certainly. We, in the early onset of ZZ, thinking about, okay, knowing that our business is predicated on these goods lasting as long as possible, like knowing that we want to be, a business that's around for some time, we really have to like dot our I's and cross our T's, right, to make sure that these goods are going to last, and as they should. So we worked with an expert in regenerative manufacturing to come up with a questionnaire slash application, that we would ask that the different designers and manufacturers complete before we started sourcing from them and buying from them. And so they all agreed to do so, which was great. And we did this because we needed to know that the furniture would last, of course, as long as possible. Again, our business model depends on it, but also we wanted to get an understanding of the materiality and get an understanding of how they treat their employees. What if there are different recyclable materials or upcycled materials that go into the construction of their furniture, or if they're using solar power, anything along those lines. Both out of we take a little bit of a hub and spoke model, because there might be a practice that one designer is doing that is awesome and should be shared with the rest of the design community. Like maybe I can remember when mycelium packaging came out, and so that was awesome, because we've got a little bit of like a Rolodex of different resources that we can share with the other designers that we partner with. But also beyond that, we wanted to at some point we wanted to at least apply to become a certified B Corp. And so that information is so key and so necessary for the B Corp application process. And, we launched the consumer in the fall of 2020. We pushed back our launch because of COVID. And when we pushed back our consumer launch, and I say we pushed back our consumer launch because we were open on the B2B side. We were working with businesses before we launched to ZZ, or before we launched consumers. We pushed back our consumer launch. And so it gave us some time to really hone in and polish our operations. And then also we used the time to apply to be a B Corp. So from really March 2020 until August, we were really getting our ducks in a row, putting together the application and whatnot. And, a year and a half later, we did become a certified B Corp. And so all that information about the designers, their practices, how they work was crucial to filling out the application. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, very cool. And I mean, that's kind of that second layer of impact. We talked about impact on the planet, impact though on workers who are manufacturing these, goods in this new fast furniture space that we talked about emerging. I mean, obviously, with all those, various chemicals that are used to manufacture cheaply made furniture, I have to imagine that that's probably not very safe for workers to be exposed to at any given amount of time. And on that note, let's talk about the exposure and impact actually on consumers. So I think most consumers probably don't realize the impact furniture is having on ourselves and on our health and our families and our homes. A lot of low cost constructed furniture, as you mentioned, are made with materials or chemicals that maybe aren't traditional, and in some cases can actually be toxic to our health. So we hear terms a lot in Cluey about like VOCs and off-gassing happening from the stuff in our homes. Can you educate our listeners on what all those things mean and why they should care about the impact that their furniture has on them and their health?
Yeah, certainly. It's a whole world, and we're really just starting to kind of enter into these depths and wade these waters and understand what it all means. But as it relates to furniture, and this is what furniture and fast fashion really have so in common, is that their largest utilized material is polyester. And so polyester is a long chain polymer derived from petroleum, literally oil. So still very much aligned with the fossil fuel industry. It's funny when we talk about like the 4 F's of sustainability, like it started with fuel, and then it was food, and then fashion. And we really think furniture is the next one. Not to get all Sesame Street, but sometimes it helps. And so, yeah, so polyester furniture, it's the most utilized upholstery across the furniture industry. And what's interesting, it might be intriguing to your listeners, is like polyester, it wasn't like some big chemical corporation was like, okay, let's make this like evil, material out of oil. It was first created in, I believe, the early 50s, because it was to allow the stay-at-home housewife more time to herself and to give her time back for her own pursuits, so that she wasn't spending so much time ironing. ironing sheets and ironing clothes and ironing tablecloths. So polyester was really created in order to provide more time to the housewife, which I think is so fascinating. And obviously, as time goes on, we learn more about this upholstery. So as it relates to the furniture industry, there is a term called FRMs, fire retardant materials, that's applied to so much upholstery in the furniture world. And wildly, FRMs are now banned in only 2 states in the United States. They were banned, I think, a little over 10 years ago in California, and then just recently were banned for sale of new items in New York State. So retailers, manufacturers cannot sell goods in New York State that still have these FRMs that are present in the upholstery. The reason that fire retardant materials were first embedded into these upholsteries is because back in like the 70s and 80s, people would be smoking indoors and they'd fall asleep with their cigarette, and then the upholstery would light on fire. Obviously, no one's really smoking indoors anymore, let alone like snoozing on their sofa with a cigarette in hand. But yet this industry is still so rampant, and so many of these upholsteries largely have FRMs. Duke University, a number of years back, did an off-gassing survey or an off-gassing study with 80 toddlers, and 100% of all these toddlers, all 80 of them, had FRMs in their bloodstreams. And FRMs are very much linked to be carcinogenic. It really affects hormonal endocrine levels. It really has a huge effect on our bodily systems in many, many ways that we're just really starting to get to know and getting to understand. And, there's of course, like all things, there's crazy lobbying going on to like protect this chemical industry and to make sure that it's still present, but we need to move away from that. And so I think little by little we are. And of course, if you want to help our cause on that, please just DM us, because we are trying to actively help with legislation in other states around that. So it's just a wild world, and I find it so fascinating, the history that usually accommodates why these things are still present, and maybe weren't necessarily evil to begin with, but now we just have to rethink them, and everything is so nuanced, and we just have to have a more contemporary conversation, if you will, around the need for these things. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the age-old story of progress is
Yes.
a new solution is introduced. Oftentimes with new solutions comes new unintended consequences that can snowball if unchecked. And I think what you're talking about is really trying to put those checks and balances back into place, bring that mindfulness back into the world of furniture consumption. But this was just fascinating. One of my favorite episodes to date on the Cluey podcast. I know our listeners are just getting a chock full amount of information and statistics. So thank you for helping to educate our listeners on the impact that your furniture in your home has on both people and the planet. So Whitney, we love to end our podcast with 2 glimmers of hope questions. The first glimmer of hope question that I have for you is, what is a new innovation in the world of impact? Maybe it's related to your specific niche in the furniture space that you're particularly jazzed about right now.
Yeah. I'm so inspired by this large macroeconomic movement that's happening of access over ownership, or the sharing economy that's growing. And so, it's believed that experience is the new luxury versus just luxury goods, if you will, purchasing luxury goods in the past. And so we've seen this method of consumption start to quote unquote disrupt different areas, like with vacation rentals, Airbnb, being able to utilize someone's awesome home elsewhere so that you can experience like a vacation home but without having to purchase a home, right? Or certainly with Uber, with private drivers, if you will, but utilize made more holistic and made more accessible through obviously technology. And we saw that with Rent the Runway too. And so I think this industry is so exciting, and it's just getting going, but it's all at the heart of it. It's all predicated on goods that last. And that's the most important thing. Like, that's truly the number one bullet point as it relates to our consumption habits, which probably aren't going to change. It's like we're only going to want to experience more, but what we produce, needs to be built in a way that many people can utilize it as it should. And it's so easy to understand how that should be the case with furniture, because furniture usually is built with guarantees, with warranties, and should be built to last longer than us. And I think we're going to return to that.
Absolutely. Well, that's making me hopeful for sure. And our second glimmer of hope question that we always like to end the podcast with, you mentioned, our consumption habits probably aren't going to change. I'm sure you are a consumer just like everyone else. So can you rapid fire name 3 impact focused brands outside of ZZ, of course, that you absolutely love to support? And what is it that they make?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I'm a tried and true. I think, Patagonia is awesome. And we like to think of Patagonia as our North Star here at ZZ. We'd love for people to consider ZZ as like the Patagonia of furniture. They just continue to look into ways to be more and more circular and are almost a think tank, right? I mean, a lot of businesses look at them and trust in them. So, very, very inspired by Patagonia. And then beyond that, there's a company called Ecovative. And so they're like almost a like bat cave mycelium lab think tank, if you will. And so they're doing just so much with mycelium, with mushrooms and fungi, everything from, I think they partnered with Adidas on a material. We've utilized them in the past for planters, little plant, for our ZZ plant. Every customer of ours gets a little ZZ plant. It comes in a mycelium pot. It's made by this company. They make a lot of packaging materials. Just we're at the advent of like such a cool renaissance of materiality, and there's so many smart minds that are working on this. So that's one company that I really, really admire. And then beyond that, I have to say, might be surprising, but I still think Etsy is a phenomenal company. And I think Etsy is going to become even more important as AI starts to just eradicate so many jobs. So we really, I mentioned Etsy because I just hope there are more marketplaces that open up similar to Etsy that allow, people to produce in their own homes, produce in their own garages, produce in their own backyards, and be able to share that with other individuals in their community or elsewhere. And I think this is how we get out of this climate crisis, right? Is just like producing with our own hands and utilizing our minds and remaining curious. And so platforms like that that put the consumer and creativity first rather than consumption is so important. Yeah.
So true. And those are great brands. So thank you so much for sharing those with us, Whitney. And thank you for coming on our podcast to get our followers clued in to the impact that our furniture has on people and the planet.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for having me. You guys are doing great work. Really impressive.
Of course. Thank you. Awesome. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to today's episode. Cluey does rate brands on our platform, and ZZ Driggs is considered one of our highest rated brands. The highest rated brands fall into a category of scoring a B- or higher on both our people and planet impact rating system. Our ratings are aggregated from best-in-class third-party data, so Cluey cannot impact the ratings of these brands ourselves. If you'd like to learn more about Cluey, how we rate, our top rated brands, and how we make money, you can find it all at clueyconsumer.com/about us. Come back next time to get clued into the latest in the world of conscious consumerism.